cruel ghost legend, known in Japanese as Kaiden Zankoku Monogatari, and please excuse my pronunciation, was an early entry in the Japanese horror film genre, and a film that was supposedly lost to time, until, thank God, an anonymous source managed to get their hands on a VHS copy of the movie and posted it to YouTube in 2014. Released in 1968, the film was apparently based on a work by Rentaro Shibata, who I could not find any more background information about. The movie follows the saga of a family of disgraced samurai Shinzaemon Fukaya, as the Fukaya clan must grapple with a curse that affects everyone they seem to come into contact with. And just a disclaimer before I get into it, because unfortunately I'm far from fluent in Japanese, I'll be going off of what the subtitles that, mind you, are not verified and may be inaccurate, done by fellow YouTubers say. Thank you guys for your work on this movie. So after a needled session with his suffering wife, Shinzaemon Fukaya stiffs the acupuncturist, who I believe is named Sojin, out of the guy's well-earned money. As is the natural course of things, the dickhead offers up his less than enthusiastic wife, Toyo, for collateral because he's still too cheap to pay. Their son, Shinichiro Fukaya, comes back from, the war, being outside, I honestly don't know, and isn't super thrilled about walking in on his mother writhing around looking distraught, while this creepy old bastard is on top of her, and with the help of his father, sticks the sword right through the guy's back. Which, I can't fault him for. And what's genuinely great about this scene is that even though Sojin is an old man, and he's clearly incapacitated against two younger, stronger samurai with weapons nonetheless, it takes him forever and a day to finally croak. But of course, not before he puts a big fat curse on Shinzaemon, Shinichiro, and the Fukaya name. They throw Sojin in the river, where apparently he explodes underwater, judging by all the blood that wasn't there a minute ago, and rob him of whatever little possession he has left, before heading home, thinking that they've been let off the hook as there were no witnesses to the crime. But of course, as the Fukayas learn much later, and much too late, the dead don't ever forget. As Shinzaemon failed to pay what he owed, like many debts, this one accrues interest, so to speak. And that interest is a trail of bloodshed, tears, and madness. Yeah, that's lame, but you get it, and I mean it. Because of unjustly murdering one dude, this entire family has to suffer. Even, and especially really, the people who had absolutely nothing to do with it. And despite the movie's age and weird attitude towards women, seriously, every single woman in this film suffers from a terminal case of Michigan Report from Hell, where they're treated like horny vixens for the majority of the time on screen until they are, inevitably, brutally killed. This thing is actually pretty stylish. It's got some genuinely creepy scenes, a broody atmosphere thanks to the black and white, and you kind of get a sense of feeling trapped, as scenes are mostly limited to the confines of a house. And even though technically this would be considered a revenge horror film, by the end you're so attached to these characters in the doomed Fukaya clan that while it's satisfying in a sense to watch their inevitable downfall, you're still left with more than a bit of empathy for them, especially when Shinzo, the youngest son of the Fukaya clan, and a boy when his father and brother committed the crime, falls victim to the curse. And Shinzo's story, the last narrative the film covers because it signals the end of the family, is something straight out of a folktale, by far the most compelling of the bunch. Unlike his brother Shinichiro, who spent most of his life robbing and just being an overall nuisance to society before getting caught by the cops, Shinzo seems to be the most genuine of them all. On the straight and narrow as a worker, saving up enough money to support both himself and his girlfriend Ohisa. But one day, while working in the home of a rich woman named Miss Suga seduces him, and a horrified Ohisa walks in to the two of them in mid-coitus. The confrontation culminates into a physical fight, and Ohisa, furious at seeing her beloved with another woman, tears out a significant portion of Suga's hair. Time passes, and we see that the wound has clearly become infected and spreads to cover Miss Suga's face, severely disfiguring her in a matter of months and leaving her without any clientele, as the people of her village now live in fear of seeing her horrid face. Shinzo takes up residency in her house, under the guise that he feels responsible for her disfigurement, when in reality he wants to get his hands on the 300 gold pieces Suga keeps stashed in a secret location in the house. so he can run off with Ohisa when the old woman croaks. As Suga becomes more disfigured, she adamantly refuses to ever let Shinzo go, threatening to rip his throat out should he ever even try to leave her. Of course, the threats escalate the night Shinzo discovers her sash of riches, and in typical Fukaya fashion, he ends up killing her and stuffing her body in a shot that is insanely unsettling underneath the floorboards vis-a-vis the Telltale Heart. But Miss Suga ultimately gets her sweet revenge. As Shinzo and Ohisa run away with her riches, Shinzo, underneath the spell of the curse that has plagued his family for years, imagines that he sees the disfigured face of Suga, only to discover that it was actually still Ohisa, but only after he rips out her throat. And like I mentioned before on this idea of sympathetic, awful characters, while Shinzo is horrible for cheating on his fiancée and killing the woman who put up with his sorry ass for so long, I was genuinely hurting for him during the finale, especially in the wake of his realization of his family lineage only following a torrent of bloodshed perpetrated by his own hand. The characters border perfectly on the precipice of being both skeevy and sympathetic, which can be a bit difficult for directors to achieve. Also, I think this is worth mentioning. If I'm following the timeline correctly, Shinzo says he was taken from the mansion where his parents were murdered 10 years ago. And at the same time, Ohisa wasn't even born yet. So that would put him at probably about 17, 18, and Ohisa at a whopping 10 years old. Yeah, that checks out. Maybe something got lost in translation. The film certainly reflects themes prevalent in J-horror, especially the idea of inevitability and predetermination. And if there's a name for this sort of phenomenon, please let me know in the comments. Think the works of Junji Ito, specifically Uzumaki and Amigara Fault, or movies like The Grudge. There is no escape, and fighting back once these divine forces have begun to turn really only prolongs the suffering. The Fukaya family's fate was determined the moment Shinichiro and his father threw Sojin into the water, and no matter how hard they tried to deny it or fight it or run away from it, each and every single one of them were doomed from the start. But, and this brings me to my next point, the Fukayas didn't really try to fight against it. Each of them were horrible in their own special way. Shinzemon was a womanizer with a bad temper. Shinichiro betrayed the trust of the people who dared to support him and bring them into their homes by doing things like robbing them or sleeping with their spouses. Shinzo, on the straight and narrow for many years, destroys the lives of 2 women by acting rashly. Did the curse fill his eyes with dollar signs and make him money hungry? Was the willingness to do anything to satisfy his greed a trait inherited from his disgraced family, lying dormant in him until the time came to strike? Even Ohisa, tied to the Fukayas in a way that I won't disclose in the video, befalls the same fate as poor Toyo, slashed in the throat and left to bleed out, only after her complacency in the robbery. Sojin curses the family because they refuse to pay back their debt, and I'd like to think that the debt in this instance maybe isn't something that is necessarily monetarily related. Because really, what can the dead do with a handful of gold coins? Perhaps this idea of paying the debt back could have meant something as simple as being a decent member of society. Paying your debt back meaning leaving the world a much better place than when you first found it. Not cheating your neighbors out of their supplies, not fucking their wives behind their backs, not stuffing their bodies under the floors of their houses and making off with their money. You get it. And ultimately, with their cheating, lying, betrayal towards other citizens, and many instances of outright murder, the Fukaya clan failed to live up to any expectations, and thus the bloodline perished. And with how horrible these guys were, perhaps it was for the best. Either way, if you want to get to your own conclusions on the film, it's available to watch on YouTube, and I suggest that you do watch this magnificent early entry of Japanese horror. And if you don't, well, you'll be getting a visit from her tonight.